Elena had been working in the Kensington mansion for almost 2 years, and every morning still felt unreal to her. The mansion was enormous, so large that her footsteps echoed whenever she walked through the hallways at dawn. Golden frames hung on every wall. Huge paintings of serious-looking ancestors watched her as she dusted, and expensive chandeliers sparkled above her like frozen fireworks. For a simple maid like her, the place felt like another world beautiful. But cold. She woke before sunrise every day, long before any of the aristocrats even turned in their beds. Her tiny room, hidden behind the kitchen corridor, was barely big enough for a bed and a wooden dresser, but Elena never complained. She had grown used to a humble life. She tied her hair neatly, slipped into her simple uniform, and stepped into the grand halls where marble floors and silk curtains made her feel small. But Elena moved with quiet grace, as if her body remembered a time when she wasn't a maid. A time when she held something much more precious than a broom. Most of the staff liked her. Mrs. Whitmore, the head housekeeper, always said she was too gentle for a place like this. And it was true. Elena never argued, never raised her voice, never forgot a task. She treated everyone with kindness, even when some of the higher-ranked servants looked down on her because she was young. Whenever someone needed help carrying laundry, setting the dining table, polishing the silverware, Elena was the first to step forward. But beneath her quietness was a secret she never spoke about. Before tragedy forced her into a life of servitude, Elena had lived a very different life. She used to spend hours sitting at a piano, her fingers dancing across the keys, losing herself in music. She had once dreamed of becoming a concert pianist. She had a teacher who believed she could achieve anything. But then her father fell sick, their savings disappeared, and the piano lessons she loved more than anything suddenly became a luxury she could not afford. Elena still remembered the day her family sold her piano. It felt like a part of her heart being carried away through the door. After her father passed, life grew even harder. She needed a job, any job, to survive. That's how she ended up at the Kensington mansion, wiping floors and polishing tables instead of playing melodies. Music became a memory she tried not to think about, because thinking about it hurt too much. Despite everything, Elena never let her sadness show. She performed her duties with calm determination. Sometimes, when no one was watching, she would pause beside the grand piano in the ballroom. It was a magnificent instrument, black and shining, the kind she had only ever seen in concert halls. Her fingertips would hover over the keys for just a moment, but then she would pull her hand back quickly, afraid someone might see and misunderstand. After all, what right did a maid have to even touch such an expensive piano? One morning, as she dusted the ballroom, sunlight streamed through the tall windows, lighting up the piano like a spotlight on a stage. Elena stood there for a moment, listening to the silence. She imagined the sound of music filling the room, soft notes rising, floating through the golden halls. Her hands tingled with memories of long-forgotten melodies. For a moment, she closed her eyes and breathed in slowly, wishing life had allowed her to keep her dream, but wishes didn't change reality. A maid couldn't become a pianist, not in this world. With a soft sigh, Elena returned to her duties. Lord Kensington, the master of the house, rarely noticed the maids unless he had a complaint. He was a proud man, always dressed in elegant suits, always carrying himself like he was above everyone else. Elena avoided him whenever possible. He never shouted at her, but his cold eyes made her feel like she barely existed. To him, she was just another servant, nothing more. Still, Elena continued her work with quiet strength. She never sought attention. She simply tried her best every day, believing that as long as she kept going, life would eventually reward her. But fate had other plans. One afternoon, Elena didn't know that her life inside the mansion was about to change, that someone was about to discover her secret talent. And that talent, her music, would soon push her into a spotlight she never asked for. She had no idea that Lord Kensington himself would be the one to drag her there. For now, all she knew was the rhythm of chores, the weight of silence, and the ache of a dream she thought she had lost forever. Yet something in her heart still whispered softly, like a distant melody waiting to be heard again. Elena didn't know it, but her story was only just beginning. The day of the announcement began like any other for Elena, but there was a strange energy in the mansion that morning. Servants rushed back and forth, polishing silverware, carrying boxes of decorations, and whispering urgently to one another. Even the usually strict Mrs. Whitmore looked more stressed than usual as she ordered everyone to hurry. Elena knew something big was happening, but no one bothered to explain it to the lower staff. She quietly continued her chores, scrubbing the long dining table until it shone like a mirror and arranging fresh flowers in tall crystal vases. She didn't mind the extra work. She was used to it, but she couldn't ignore the heated excitement that filled every corner of the mansion. While dusting the grand staircase railing, Elena overheard two footmen talking in hushed voices. "Did you hear?" One whispered. "Lord Kensington is hosting a major gathering this weekend. Some of the most influential aristocrats in the region are coming." The other footman whistled softly. "No wonder everyone is panicking. If anything goes wrong, Lord Kensington will be furious." Elena lowered her eyes and continued wiping, pretending she wasn't listening. But inside she felt a small knot of worry. Lord Kensington was strict and demanding on normal days. What would he be like with so many important eyes on him? Later that afternoon, Mrs. Whitmore gathered all the maids in the west hallway. Her face looked unusually serious. "Listen carefully," she said. "Lord Kensington expects everything to be perfect. The ballroom must be spotless, the decorations flawless, and the staff completely disciplined. No mistakes. Understood?" All the maids nodded nervously. "Elena," Mrs. Whitmore added, turning toward her, "you'll assist in the ballroom this week. Do not touch anything related to music or instruments. That's for the hired musicians." Elena bowed her head obediently. Though those words struck a soft chord inside her, music, just hearing the word made her heart tighten and memories stir. She quietly followed the others to begin the cleaning. The ballroom was in chaos, decorators climbing ladders, florists arranging bouquets, chefs rushing in and out with trays. Elena slipped into the background as she always did, working silently and efficiently. As she dusted a row of golden wall lamps, two maids nearby giggled softly. "Did you know?" one whispered. "Elena can play the piano." The other one gasped. "No, really?" Elena froze for a split second but kept her face calm. "I heard it from Clara," the first maid continued. "Apparently she used to take lessons before she came here. Can you imagine that? Our quiet little Elena playing like a lady." They laughed lightly, but it wasn't mean, more like they were surprised. Still, Elena's cheeks warmed. She wished they hadn't talked so loudly. Unfortunately, they weren't the only ones who heard. From across the ballroom, Lord Kensington had just entered with two decorators. He paused mid-conversation, his head lifting slightly, eyes narrowing in interest. "A maid?" he said. "A piano?" The decorators looked confused, but Lord Kensington ignored them. He watched Elena from a distance, how she avoided eye contact, how she worked quietly without drawing attention. There was something almost suspicious about her silence. He walked toward Mrs. Whitmore. "Is it true one of your maids claims to play the piano?" Mrs. Whitmore stiffened. "My lord?" "Oh, some of the girls gossip too much." I do not believe Elena meant anything by it. "So her name is Elena," he said, eyes drifting to the young maid again. "Yes, my lord. But she's shy. She barely speaks." "I'm sure she never meant to." Lord Kensington raised a hand, cutting her off. "Interesting." And then, with no further explanation, he walked away. Leaving Mrs. Whitmore confused and slightly pale, Elena did not know he had listened. She only felt uncomfortable, wishing her past had stayed hidden. She had worked hard to bury the part of her that longed to sit in front of a piano again. That girl no longer existed, she reminded herself. Only the maid remained, but fate doesn't care about what people want to forget. That evening, after hours of preparation, Lord Kensington called for the entire staff to gather in the service hall. Everyone stood in neat rows. Elena felt her pulse quicken when she noticed he kept glancing in her direction. "I have an announcement," he said, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "In 3 days, we will host one of the most significant gatherings of the year. I expect total excellence. Every detail must be perfect." No one dared breathe too loudly. He continued. "There will be music and entertainment as well. However," he paused, eyes locking onto Elena. I find it unnecessary to hire additional performers. A low murmur ran through the staff. Elena, he said sharply. Her breath caught. She stepped forward hesitantly. Yes, my lord. I hear you have certain musical abilities. Her heart dropped. My lord, I want you, he interrupted, to play the piano during the opening of the event. The entire room turned to look at her. Elena's blood went cold. She felt small, trapped, helpless. But I haven't played in years, she breathed, shaking. In years, she breathed, shaking. I am only a maid, my lord. Lord Kensington's lips curved into a slow, cold smile. Yes, he said. Exactly. Something in the way he said it made her realize the truth. He wasn't asking to honor her talent, he was planning to use her to amuse himself, to entertain his elite guests with the embarrassment of a servant. She stood frozen in silence. Her life, once ordinary and quiet, had just taken a sharp and terrifying turn, and she had no idea just how far this order would change everything. Elena barely slept that night. Her hands trembled long after Lord Kensington dismissed the staff. She lay on her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling in the darkness, her mind spinning with fear. How could she possibly stand in front of wealthy nobles and play a grand piano after years of silence? She wasn't the confident girl she used to be. She wasn't even sure she remembered how to play properly. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lord Kensington's cold smile, the smile of a man who enjoyed control more than kindness. He had given her an order, not a request. There was no room for refusal. She was a maid, a servant. In his world, people like her didn't have the right to say no. The next morning, the mansion woke before the sun. Preparations intensified, and Elena moved through her tasks like a ghost, her thoughts far away. She tried to scrub floors, arrange linens, and polish glassware, but her hands shook constantly. Mrs. Whitmore noticed her pale face and worried eyes. Elena, she said softly while straightening a tablecloth, are you unwell? I'm fine, Elena whispered, though it was obvious she was, and single quotes. Mrs. Whitmore sighed. Child, you don't have to prove anything. Just do your best. Lord Kensington may be demanding, but he isn't asking me to do my best, Elena said quietly. He wants to put me on display. Like a joke. Mrs. Whitmore looked around nervously, making sure no one else heard. She lowered her voice. Then don't give him the satisfaction. If you must play, then play with dignity. But Elena didn't feel dignity. She felt trapped. Later that evening, as she walked through the empty ballroom to deliver linens, she paused beside the grand piano. The instrument shone under the soft golden lights, beautiful yet intimidating. She gently touched the polished surface. Her reflection stared back at her small, fragile, terrified. She imagined sitting there, surrounded by aristocrats who would laugh at the idea of a maid performing. She imagined the silence, the pressure, the shame of failing in front of everyone. Her throat tightened. She stepped away quickly. As if the piano were something dangerous, what she didn't know was that Lord Kensington had entered the ballroom behind her. You've seen the piano often enough, he said suddenly. Elena flinched, turning around with wide eyes. My lord was only passing by. He walked closer, his steps slow, confident. I do hope you're preparing yourself. The gathering is important. My reputation cannot be stained by a maid who freezes on stage. Elena swallowed hard. My lord, I haven't practiced in a long time. I'm afraid I won't play well. Oh, that's quite all right, he said in a smooth, almost amused tone. In fact, your struggle may be far more entertaining than the performance itself. Her breath caught. So he admitted it. He wasn't expecting talent. He was expecting humiliation. My lord, she whispered, please, allow me to work behind the scenes. I can help in many other ways. He raised an eyebrow. Are you refusing my order? Elena's voice broke. No, my lord. Good, he said with satisfaction. Be ready. With that, he turned and walked out of the ballroom, leaving her trembling beside the piano. The next 2 days felt like a cruel countdown. Every servant was overwhelmed with the workload, but Elena's fear grew heavier as the event approached. She could barely eat. At night, she would stare at her hands, flexing her fingers, trying to remember old movement scales, chords, melodies she once knew by heart. She felt like two versions of herself were fighting inside her. The girl who once loved music, and the maid who feared disgrace on the morning of the event. Elena dressed in her cleanest uniform, but she felt weaker than ever. The mansion buzzed with excitement and tension. Chefs hurried through the hallways with trays, decorators made last-minute adjustments, and servants polished surfaces that already looked spotless just before the guests arrived. Lord Kensington called for Elena. She followed him toward the ballroom, her heart pounding like a drum inside her chest. The closer they walked, the more her legs felt like they might give out. "You will play when I signal you," he said coldly. "Until then, stay out of sight." "Yes, my lord," she whispered. From behind a tall pillar, she watched the ballroom fill with elegantly dressed guests. Men in black tuxedos, women in shimmering gowns, jewels glittering under crystal chandeliers. Their laughter echoed softly. Mixing with the sound of clinking glasses and polite greetings, Elena felt completely out of place. She didn't belong in their world. She wasn't one of them. She wasn't even supposed to be seen, much less heard. When Lord Kensington stepped onto the small stage to welcome his guests, her heart hammered harder. She knew her moment was approaching. Her palms were sweaty and her knees shook. She silently prayed he would forget his plan or change his mind, but he did in single quotes, "did not instead." He scanned the crowd with a proud smile and said, "Tonight we have a special performance, something rather unexpected from my household." Elena's breath stopped. Several guests leaned forward with curiosity. Lord Kensington looked directly at her hiding place. "Elena," he said, "step forward." Her feet felt like stone, but she forced herself to move. Every eye in the ballroom followed her as she walked toward the grand piano. She could hear murmurs, soft laughter, whispers of disbelief. "A maid? Is she serious? What is this?" Elena's cheeks burned with humiliation as she sat at the piano bench. Her entire body trembled. Lord Kensington leaned closer and whispered just loud enough for her to hear, "Do try not to embarrass me too much." And then he walked away, leaving her alone under the bright lights, surrounded by strangers, waiting to see her fail. Her fingers hovered above the keys. She closed her eyes, and the room fell silent. For a moment, Elena could not hear anything except the frantic beat of her own heart. The room felt too bright, too large, too heavy. She sensed every pair of eyes fixed on her, expecting something amusing, something embarrassing. Many guests already wore small smirks, as if they were watching a show meant to entertain their boredom. Her fingers hovered over the piano keys, but she couldn't bring herself to touch them. Her hands were cold and shaky. She felt like the frightened girl she had once been, small, powerless, invisible. Except now everyone was looking at her. A woman in a sparkling silver gown whispered loudly to her husband, "I didn't know Kensington kept musicians as maids." "How odd." Her husband chuckled. He probably found her humming during chores. This should be entertaining. Elena's throat tightened. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, to escape this nightmare. She tried to breathe slowly, but her chest felt tight. Then she noticed something she hadn't seen before. Standing near the back of the room was a boy about 10 years old, dressed neatly but not extravagantly like the others. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't judging. He was simply watching her with curious, gentle eyes. And in that gaze she felt a flicker of something she had lost long ago: encouragement. Elena inhaled shakily. One note, just one, she told herself. Maybe she could manage that. But before she could try, Lord Kensington clapped his hands to draw the room's attention again. "Do not expect perfection," he said loudly, giving the crowd a sly smile. "Remember, she is only a maid." A wave of laughter passed through the audience. Elena felt her heart sink. She lowered her eyes to hide the tears gathering there. This wasn't a performance, it was a public humiliation arranged for wealthy amusement. Lord Kensington stepped aside, letting the spotlight settle on her. His expression was calm but sharp, like a man waiting for a puppet to dance. Elena swallowed. Her fingers brushed lightly against the keys. Even that tiny touch sent a shock through her. Memories flickered in her mind, her childhood piano, her father smiling proudly, her teacher praising her progress. That was a different world, a different life. She pressed one key softly. A delicate note echoed through the silent ballroom, some eyebrows raised. A few smirks faded slightly. She pressed another, then another, trying to gather courage. But her hands trembled so much that the notes sounded uneven, broken. People shifted, whispering, "Poor thing," someone muttered. "She's terrified," another said. "Well, this is awkward," a woman sighed. Elena's eyes watered again. She wanted to run. But the boy in the back, still watching her with encouragement, tilted his head slightly, as if silently telling her, "Don't give up." Her breath steadied. Just a little, but before she could begin properly, the ballroom doors opened with a soft push. A small group of late-arriving guests entered, and one of them laughed loudly at a joke. The sound startled Elena, and her hand accidentally struck two wrong keys. A harsh, unpleasant noise filled the room. Several people winced. Lord Kensington's jaw tightened, though not in sympathy and irritation. He gave the crowd an apologetic smile, as if saying, "See? I warned you." Heat rushed up Elena's neck. Her vision blurred. Maybe she should stop. Maybe she should just stand up and leave the room. But no, she could not. Leaving without permission would bring even harsher consequences. And deep down, a stubborn spark of pride still flickered. A stubborn spark of pride still flickered. She had loved music once. That love hadn't died completely. She closed her eyes again and tried to shut out everything, the murmurs, the judgmental stares, the grandeur of the room, the heavy expectations. She listened only to the faint memory of a melody she used to play soft. Slow, but full of emotion, she placed her fingers correctly. Her hands steadied. She pressed the keys gently. This time, the notes were clearer, not perfect, not confident, but real. The room quieted. A few guests who were whispering stopped mid-sentence. They exchanged brief looks, unsure of what they were hearing. The melody was fragile, like someone rebuilding something broken, piece by piece. Lord Kensington frowned. He was expecting her to fall apart, yet she seemed to be improving. Elena continued, carefully shaping the tune she once knew so well. Her fingers remembered more than her mind expected. The shaky beginning slowly softened into something sweeter, something vulnerable. She wasn't performing for the crowd. She wasn't performing for Lord Kensington. She was playing for herself, for the girl she used to be, for the father who believed in her, for the music that had always lived inside her no matter how deeply she had buried it. The boy in the back smiled, but just as the melody began to grow steady, a noblewoman broke the silence. "Well, this is surprising," she said loudly. "She's not entirely terrible." A ripple of laughter followed. Elena's confidence wavered. Her hands trembled again. For a moment she lost the rhythm, and the melody faltered. Her heart dropped. Lord Kensington smirked, satisfied, yet Elena did not stop. She inhaled slowly, blinked away the tears that threatened to fall, and continued playing. The melody was wounded now, but it was still alive, and something about that made a few guests stop laughing. They weren't impressed yet, but they were curious. In that heavy moment, without anyone realizing it, Elena took her first step toward a performance that would soon shock the entire room. But for now, she played alone against a sea of judgment, with nothing but her trembling fingers and the fading dream holding her. Together, Elena's fingers trembled as she continued to play. But something inside her had begun to shift. The melody she had started soft, broken, uncertain, slowly began to connect with memories she thought she had locked away forever. Her father's gentle voice, her teacher's patient smile, the feeling of sitting at a piano without fear of judgment. Those memories danced around her, warming the cold edges of her heart. Yet the ballroom around her remained a battlefield. She could feel the pressure like a heavy cloth over her shoulders. Every wrong note seemed louder in that grand, echoing hall. Every whisper felt sharper than a knife, but she kept going. Her hands remembered more than she expected. They moved from key to key with caution, sometimes stumbling, sometimes steady. The melody she chose was one she used to practice during her earliest lesson, simple, slow, filled with emotion. It wasn't flashy or impressive, but it came from a place inside her that still ached. For a few moments, the guests remained polite but uninterested. Some sipped their drinks. Others leaned on their chairs, waiting for her to slip again. Lord Kensington watched from the side, arms crossed, his expression cool and almost bored. He had wanted a spectacle, not a timid attempt at beauty, but then something unexpected began to happen. The melody grew clearer. Elena's fingers, once stiff with fear, began to glide with familiarity. Her body loosened slightly as the music took shape. She no longer stared at the keys with panic. Her eyes softened. Her breathing steadied. It was as if she had unlocked a small door inside herself, releasing the version of her she had hidden for years. A few guests noticed the change. A man near the front tilted his head, listening more carefully. A young woman lowered her fan, her curiosity replacing her earlier smirk. Even the soft chatter in the back of the room began to fade. Elena didn't see any of this. Her eyes were closed now, her lashes resting gently on her cheeks, as if the world around her had disappeared. She wasn't in Lord Kensington's mansion anymore. She wasn't surrounded by nobles who expected her to fail. She wasn't a maid being degraded for entertainment. She was a girl sitting in her childhood room, practicing a melody her father loved to hear. Her heartbeat softened. Her hands warmed. She forgot about being watched. The crowd grew silent, not out of awe yet, but confusion. The maid wasn't collapsing. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't creating embarrassment. She was improving. Lord Kensington noticed this too. His eyebrow twitched. His posture straightened slightly. This wasn't what he had planned. She wasn't supposed to get comfortable. She wasn't supposed to find confidence. And she definitely wasn't supposed to make his guests listen. He narrowed his eyes, watching her with growing irritation. Meanwhile, the boy in the back, the one who had looked at her with kindness, smiled again. He tugged his mother's sleeve gently and whispered, "She's good." His mother glanced at Elena, surprised. "She's better than I expected." The melody began to rise, gaining emotion. Elena's fingers danced a little faster, creating a warm flow of notes that filled the room like sunlight spreading across a quiet morning. Her posture changed too. She sat straighter, more secure. The ballroom had never heard anything like this from a maid. Some guests exchanged surprised glances. "Is this the same girl?" Someone whispered. "I thought she'd play like a beginner," another murmured. She looks like she belongs there." The shift in the room was small at first, but it grew with every passing second. Curiosity replaced ridicule. Interest replaced boredom. A few nobles even leaned forward slightly in their seats, watching the young maid with unexpected respect, but Elena didn't see any of it. She was lost in the song. At one point, she opened her eyes and saw the chandelier lights reflected on the polished piano surface. Something inside her chest tightened painfully, not from fear this time, but from longing. She remembered how deeply she had loved the piano, how she once believed she had a future with it. That memory made her next set of notes richer, fuller. Then, suddenly, her finger slipped again. A small mistake. A broken chord, a murmur passed through the audience. Elena's breath caught. The fragile confidence she had built trembled like glass. "Don't fall apart." "Not now." She steadied her hands. She forced herself to keep going. The melody stumbled but didn't stop. Her resilience surprised even her. Someone in the crowd began clapping slowly, softly, just once or twice. ENCOURGINGLY. Lord Kensington shot a sharp glare toward the sound, and the clapping stopped immediately, but Elena had heard it, and that was enough. She continued with renewed strength, pouring her emotions into the keys. Her fingers no longer told a perfect story, but they told a real one. A story of fear, loss, longing, and courage. A story the audience had not expected to hear from a servant. When the melody reached its gentlest moment, a soft, trembling note held longer than she intended, the room felt oddly warm. Guests who normally mocked without guilt now remained quiet, caught between disbelief and fascination. Even Lord Kensington's smirk faded. His expression stiffened with annoyance. But there was something else too, a flicker of surprise. He couldn't hide. Elena played the final note of the melody. The room was silent, for the first time, since she sat at the piano. Elena dared to look up. What she saw in the faces around her was not laughter, not mockery, but stunned stillness, and though she didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning of the moment that would change her life forever. Lord Kensington felt a strange tightness in his chest as the final note faded into silence. He hadn't expected this. He had imagined the guests laughing, whispering, exchanging amused smiles at a maid fumbling on the keys. He had imagined Elena's embarrassment giving him a sense of superiority, a reminder of the distance between master and servant, but instead, he saw something else entirely. He saw nobles sitting still, uncertain, their eyes searching for a reaction. He saw an unexpected seriousness in their expressions, as if they had witnessed something they did not know how to describe. And worst of all, he saw their attention fixed on Elena, not on him. It irritated him more than he wanted to admit. He cleared his throat loudly, attempting to break the silence before it grew into admiration. But even that small sound felt weak compared to the quiet power that Elena's playing had left behind. Meanwhile, Elena was still sitting at the piano, breathing unevenly. She had barely processed the fact that she had made it to the end without falling apart. Her body felt light, almost unreal. When she looked up, her heart pounded again. She expected laughter to explode at any moment, but the silence continued, uncomfortable, unexpected. A man seated near the front leaned toward his wife. "I did not see that coming," he murmured. His wife nodded slowly, her eyes still on Elena. "Neither did I." Another woman whispered to her companion. "She plays with emotion. Not polished, but honest. Honest." That word hit Elena like a soft wave. Lord Kensington, however, bristled at the comment. He stepped forward quickly, ready to pull the attention back to himself, but a gentleman in a burgundy coat raised a hand. "That piece, did she learn it on her own?" he asked, addressing Kensington politely. Lord Kensington forced a smile, though annoyance swirled inside him. "Oh, nothing impressive. A childish tune, most likely something she picked up while dusting instruments." A few guests frowned at the dismissive answer, but before they could respond, an elderly woman spoke up. "Regardless of the tune," she said in a clear, steady voice, the emotion behind it was not childish. Her words hung in the air like a challenge, polite yet undeniable. Elena's eyes widened. No one had spoken in her favor in such a gathering before. She felt heat rush to her cheeks, not embarrassment this time, but something unfamiliar. Something close to hope. Lord Kensington resisted the urge to glare. Instead, he gave a tight smile. "Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was simply a small curiosity. Let us move on to the real entertainment." He motioned toward the hired musicians waiting in the corner, eager to move the spotlight away from Elena, but the crowd didn't shift as he expected. A few people continued looking at Elena, whispering quietly with interest. The young boy who had watched her earlier clapped softly, his eyes shining with admiration. His mother gently put a hand on his shoulder, but she too smiled warmly at Elena. Elena lowered her gaze, overwhelmed. She stood from the piano bench, intending to retreat to her place behind the staff. But as she tried to slip away quietly, a noblewoman reached out and lightly touched her arm. "You were brave," the woman said softly. "It takes courage to play under so many eyes." Elena swallowed, unable to speak for a moment. "Thank you, ma'am," she finally whispered. The woman nodded and let her go. Lord Kensington watched the exchange with growing irritation. He had wanted Elena to look foolish, not to receive gentle words from his guests. This entire situation was slipping away from his control. As Elena moved toward the corner of the room, she passed by two younger aristocrats who whispered to one another. "She has raw talent," one said. "Imagine what she could do with proper training." The other replied, their words struck her harder than any insult ever had, not because they were cruel, but because they awakened something she had buried deep inside. Talent, training, a life she once dreamed of. A world far out of reach. By the time she reached the edge of the ballroom, Her hands were trembling again, but now from emotion, not fear. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. She felt dizzy, confused, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in the room. She had never expected to be noticed not like this, but then she heard Lord Kensington's voice, sharp and low. "Elena," she turned. He stood only a few steps away, his expression calm but his eyes cold. "Do not let this attention go to your head," he said in a tone that felt like a warning. "Remember your place." His words hit her like ice. Even after the fragile praise she had received, she was reminded of the cruel truth. She was still a maid. "Yes, my lord," she said softly. He leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "This was not meant to build you up. Do not mistake it for kindness." She lowered her head. "Of course, my lord." But something inside her had changed, just a little. For the first time, she felt a tiny spark of defiance flicker inside her heart. A quiet voice whispered, "You are more than he thinks you are." She didn't dare speak it. But she felt it. Lord Kensington stepped back, satisfied that he had reasserted control. What he didn't realize was that he hadn't, not fully. Across the ballroom, two elderly musicians exchanged thoughtful looks, and the boy still stared at Elena as if he had witnessed something magical. Several guests murmured softly, their opinions of the maid shifting in ways Kensington couldn't easily undo, and Elena herself. She stood straighter than before, her heart both terrified and strangely alive. Her performance was meant to be her humiliation. Instead, it became the moment that made the entire audience see her differently. And Lord Kensington sensed too late that something inside the room was changing in ways he never intended. Elena tried to fade into the background after her performance, hoping the rest of the evening would pass without anyone noticing her again. She stood near the wall with the other servants, hands clasped tightly, heart still pounding. Her fingers tingled from the music she had played, as if the notes had left a trace of warmth on her skin, but the room had changed in ways she hadn't expected. Guests who had once sneered at her now whispered to each other in curious tones. Some glanced her way more than once, their expressions thoughtful instead of mocking. It was a strange feeling, unfamiliar, uncomfortable, almost frightening. She wasn't used to being looked at as anything more than a maid polishing floors. Being seen, truly seen, felt like standing under a bright spotlight she hadn't asked for. The hired musicians began to play their polished, elegant pieces, filling the ballroom with smooth classical notes. The guests tried to return their attention to them, but every now and then, someone's gaze drifted back to Elena. She felt like she didn't belong in the room at all. Then, during a short break between musical pieces, something unexpected happened. The gentleman in the burgundy coat approached Lord Kensington. Elena could hear parts of their conversation. It wasn't loud, but the musicians had paused, and the room was momentarily quieter. "That maid of yours," the gentleman said. "She plays with remarkable sincerity." Lord Kensington forced a polite smile. "A lucky moment, nothing more." "I disagree," the gentleman said calmly. "There was feeling in her music. Real feeling. Most performers play for applause. She played as if the music meant something." Elena's cheeks grew warm as she overheard. She lowered her eyes and pretended not to be listening. Another guest joined the conversation. "Indeed, there's something refreshing about her style. Raw, but powerful." Lord Kensington's smile tightened. "You are giving too much attention to a maid." But it was too late. Several guests were already discussing her. The elderly woman who had defended Elena earlier approached with a graceful nod. "Talent does not ask for permission before appearing," she said calmly. "It shows itself where it chooses, even in unexpected places." Elena's heart fluttered. The woman's words felt like someone had placed a warm hand on her shoulder. Lord Kensington did not respond. His irritation simmered beneath the surface. As the conversations continued around the room, Elena felt a strange mix of gratitude and fear. She didn't want to anger Lord Kensington further, but she couldn't deny the gentle joy that swelled inside her when people spoke kindly about her music. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a different life, one where she wasn't a servant, where she could sit at a piano without fear, where her hands weren't meant for scrubbing floors but for creating melodies, but the dream was too fragile. She forced herself to shake it away. Not now. Not here. Then, something even more surprising happened. The boy who had watched her performance earlier suddenly approached her, carefully navigating through the adults. His mother followed behind him with a soft, apologetic smile. The boy stopped in front of Elena and held out a small folded paper. "I drew this," he said shyly. "It's you." Playing the piano. Elena blinked in surprise. Her hands trembled as she accepted the drawing. On it, she saw a childlike sketch of herself sitting at the grand piano, eyes closed, surrounded by little stars the boy had drawn around her. It was simple, but heartfelt. "It's beautiful," Elena whispered, touched more deeply than she expected. "Thank you." The boy smiled brightly. "I liked your music. It made me feel calm." Elena felt her eyes sting. "I'm glad," she whispered. "Truly." The boy's mother stepped forward. "You were lovely, dear. Very brave." Before Elena could respond, Lord Kensington's sharp voice cut through the moment. "Elena," he said firmly, "return to your duties." The warmth in Elena's chest cooled instantly. She bowed politely to the boy and his mother, whispered a quiet, "Thank you," and stepped back. Lord Kensington approached her with stiff shoulders. His jaw was tight as he whispered sharply, "Stop drawing attention. You are a servant. Nothing more." Elena looked down. "Yes, my lord." But even as she tried to make herself small again, the guests continued to glance her way. Their expressions thoughtful, not mocking, not amused, but impressed. The musicians resumed playing, but the room felt different now. The people who listened to them also compared them silently to the maid who had played with trembling hands but a passionate heart. Elena returned to her corner, struggling to control her emotions. She felt grateful, proud, overwhelmed, and frightened all at once. She had wanted to avoid attention, yet she couldn't deny the spark of happiness still glowing quietly inside her. For the first time in years, someone had said she had talent. For the first time, someone saw her as more than a maid. Lord Kensington watched the crowd with growing frustration. His plan had gone wrong. Instead of a humiliating spectacle, Elena had created a moment that softened the room and shifted the attention away from him. He clenched his jaw. This was not over. As the evening went on, Elena stood silently, unaware that the most dramatic moment of the night was still waiting to unfold. A moment that would shock every person in the ballroom, including her. Every person in the ballroom, including her. As the evening continued, Elena tried to remain unnoticed, standing quietly with the other servants. Her heart still buzzed with everything that had happened, the unexpected praise, the soft smiles, the boy's sweet drawing folded in her pocket. But she knew the night wasn't over yet. Something inside her whispered that the final moment was still coming. The musicians finished their set, and the guests drifted toward the dining hall for the next part of the event. Elena followed the group of servants carrying trays and glasses, doing her best to focus on her tasks. She didn't want to draw any more attention. She didn't want to anger Lord Kensington again, but fate had other plans. As dessert was served, a group of guests gathered near the long table, chatting excitedly. Elena walked past them, intending to refill water glasses, when she overheard something that made her heart stop. Why not let her play again? Someone suggested brightly. Elena froze mid-step. Another guest nodded. Yes, this time with proper attention. The first piece touched everyone. I'd like to hear what else she can do. Lord Kensington stiffened visibly. That's unnecessary, he said sharply. The evening's entertainment is already organized? But the elderly woman who had defended Elena earlier raised an eyebrow. Oh, but it would be delightful. Let the musicians rest for a moment. Give the young maid another chance. A wave of agreement swept through the guests. She deserves it. I'd love to hear more. Such honest talent shouldn't be wasted. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She stared down at the floor, gripping her tray tightly. Afraid it might slip from her hands, Lord Kensington forced a smile, but anyone watching closely could see his frustration. Elena is occupied with her duties, he said. She cannot simply abandon them. The gentleman in the burgundy coat turned toward Elena. "Child, would you play for us again?" "Only if you feel comfortable." "Comfortable?" She was terrified. But something inside her, something deep and quiet, began to grow. A soft but steady voice whispered, "This is your chance." Elena looked up slowly. Dozens of eyes were on her again, but this time the expressions were warm, encouraging, hopeful. The boy from earlier gave her a small, excited nod. His mother smiled gently. Lord Kensington stepped closer, his voice low and threatening. "Say no." Elena's heart thudded. She knew the consequences of defying him. She knew what he was capable of, but she also knew that this moment might never come again. Not in her whole life. She swallowed hard, then spoke in a quiet but steady voice. "I will play." The room lit up with pleased murmurs. Lord Kensington's eyes burned with anger, but he couldn't openly object without damaging his reputation. Reluctantly, he stepped aside. His jaw tight, Elena walked toward the grand piano again, this time on her own without being forced. Her legs trembled, but her heart felt strangely light. She sat on the bench and closed her eyes for a moment, letting the silence surround her. She remembered her father's voice telling her to breathe before each performance. So she breathed. Then she placed her fingers on the keys. The first notes that came out were gentle and calm, like a soft sunrise. The melody was one she had learned long ago, more complex than the first piece, filled with quiet strength and emotion. As she played, her fear melted away. The music grew warmer, deeper, and richer with every movement of her hands. The room fell into a spell. Guests stood perfectly still. Servants paused in their work. Even the musicians watched her with wide eyes. Recognizing the raw, natural talent behind her playing, Elena poured herself into the music. Every memory, every ache, every hope she had buried came alive in her performance. She was no longer a maid in a stiff uniform. She was the girl she once dreamed of, being a pianist who played from the heart. As her fingers flew across the keys, the melody lifted and soared through the hall. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't trained. But it was real. So beautifully real that some guests felt their eyes sting. The elderly woman dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. The boy held his breath, mesmerized. Even the chef peeking through the doorway froze in admiration. Lord Kensington's expression shifted from irritation to disbelief. He looked around the room. Everyone was captivated, fully absorbed by the performance he had tried to use as a tool for humiliation. The music rose one more time, then softened into a gentle ending. The final note floated in the air like a feather before settling into silence. For a moment, no one moved. Then the entire ballroom erupted in applause, not polite clapping. Not curious clapping, a standing ovation. Guests rose from their seats, cheering loudly. Hands came together in thunderous applause. Some whistled. Some called out, "Bravo!" and "Beautiful!" and "Amazing!" The boy jumped up and down, clapping wildly. Elena froze, overwhelmed. She had never dreamed of anything like this. She didn't know what to do. Her eyes filled with tears, not of fear, but of joy, shock, disbelief. Lord Kensington stood stiffly, trapped in the spotlight he had never intended to give her. The crowd ignored him completely, focusing all their admiration on the maid who had just outshone every performer they had seen this season. Two musicians walked to Elena and bowed to her respectfully. Musicians bowing to a maid. She trembled, unsure how to respond. The elderly woman approached her with a warm smile. "My dear, you have a gift. A true gift. If you ever wish to study music again, I will personally help arrange it." Elena's breath caught. A new life. A real chance. A door she thought was locked forever. Opening, she could barely whisper, "Thank you." As applause continued, Lord Kensington stepped back in silence, realizing with a sinking heart that his attempt to humiliate her had done the opposite instead of breaking her. He had revealed her. Elena stood from the piano bench, tears in her eyes and warmth in her chest, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. Her life had changed right there, in front of the entire audience. And this time she wasn't afraid, she was ready. She wasn't afraid, she was ready.